Now, it's a common thing we hear about Venezuela and nearly every other socialist or communist attempt that has ever been tried. That wasn't real socialism, or that wasn't real communism, or they misinterpreted Marx, or they should have done this, or if I had been in power, it wouldn't have ended in such a bloodbath. Now, in a way, people who say this are correct. Socialism, communism, and Marxism are not fully realized until you have a stateless, moneyless, utopian society. So anything that isn't that, they can say it wasn't true socialism or communism. The fact of the matter is that although Venezuela obviously is not the fairy tale landscape described in Marxist ideology, it is exactly what you should expect when centralization of economic affairs is consolidated into one central authority. Not much occurred in Venezuela without the government greenlighting it. They put all their eggs into one oily basket, and when that caught on fire, well, we're seeing how that's playing out right now. The private ownership of the means of production and privately owned businesses were frowned upon, to say the least. This is why the Venezuelan government was seizing private businesses left and right. Now, one thing that is often said by socialists is that it is the US and our sanctions on Venezuela that has caused this havoc. That might partly be true, only partly, which is why I don't support sanctions on Venezuela. Let it be a purely socialistic failure so it doesn't muddy the lesson we should all learn, because simply blaming it on sanctions is ignoring quite a lot, which is, for one, as I said earlier, the government put all its eggs in the oil basket. When prices dropped, it shouldn't be surprising that chaos would ensue. This was a direct result of incompetency and huge risk-taking on the part of the centralized economic planning apparatus in Venezuela. When it's a free market and everyone has more control over which markets they expose themselves to and what risks they want to take, you at least have the option and capability of shielding yourself from a certain industry, at least to some degree. Under centralized control, you have no choice, you have no freedom. Under a free market, your foresight could be very useful to you and to those you may advise. Under socialism, it does not matter what you think you know. Your knowledge, your skills, your foresight, your predictive abilities, all of these are useless because you have no control. It should also be pointed out that violence within socialism is inevitable because of human nature. People naturally recognize ownership. Even Chavez and Maduro. There are videos of Chavez going around pointing at buildings and telling his ministers to expropriate it. Expropriation is the seizure of property by the government. It's the claim to that property through direct threats of violence. So although Maduro and Chavez had a twisted view of property, they do recognize it. It's just that they don't want ownership for anyone but the state. I should not have to point out the obvious, but when the rubber meets the road, people don't respond well to the seizure of their property. Instability generally results. Another thing to point out about the US sanctions and those that lay the blame solely at the feet of those sanctions, well, it's worth pointing out that Maduro didn't even do this. In fact, they had severe bread shortages, and Maduro did not blame the sanctions. He said the bakeries were behind a bread war, causing shortages. And of course, threats of confiscation of their property was the solution to this. Maduro and Chavez both routinely blamed the last vestiges of anything resembling a private business for all of the country's ills. Another thing to point out about sanctions, again, is that Maduro would constantly chastise his government for the lack of results and the lack of prosperity that they did not bring forth. He's not blaming sanctions, he's running statism into the red, grinding the gears and wondering why his economy is on fire. Is it free people or a violent, sadistic, thieving government that is at fault? I think that the answer is obvious. But that has to be it for now. Like and subscribe because it's a huge help, and I will see you later.